Viewer comments. Nazir Ghazi Photography says the GM2100 isn't solar powered and doesn't have the Bluetooth for auto time correction. So, your comparison is completely invalid. Sorry. Well, you don't have to be sorry. It's an opinion that you have. However, that opinion for comparison is wrong. Well, let's define what comparison is. Comparison is a consideration or estimate of similar or dissimilar things or people. The things have similarities, like like what we described there, the GM2100, because it is the 2100 family, compared to the GMWB 2100. Of course, they have certain things that are dissimilar, such as the lack of function, such as the finishing and the case back. There are things that are not the same with the other version, but that's the whole point. When you compare, you actually see what's dissimilar. We interrupt this incoherent ignoramus to help him out with his argument. What he meant here is that you should not confuse the objective with the process. The objective is to find similarities and differences. To achieve this goal, the process used is comparison. In fact, the commenter used comparison to raise the issue of the GM2100 being different from the GMB2100. So in a stroke of cruel irony, he actually validated the comparison by using it as the way to see the similarities and differences between the two Casioaks. We now return to this mutilated show. Kova Rusta says, I really appreciate your job here on YouTube, but let's forget about all of the junk comments and go through the heart of the matter. In fact, as a professional frogman, I'm impatiently waiting the latest release of Casio Gshock's MG, or I think he meant here MRG Frogman, that you made a video about recently, but no news anymore. Should we still wait? Yes, you should wait, because that is a very clear image that came from it's ironic, it's not really clear because it's actually very blurry, it's a very small image, but that was clearly coming from Gshock themselves. It's a Gshock render that just happens to be a really small image. The signature of Gshock when it comes to these milestone anniversaries, for them to actually run the whole year and make these very limited editions throughout the whole year. So it's still just January. We're coming into February and we're already hearing a lot of other models that are coming up for this 40th anniversary. So Marcel 7427 says, the overhang on metal models is pretty bad for small wrists. This is a common trait of Gshocks, actually, not just Casioaks, but all Gshocks, because they're massive watches that they protrude out of your wrists. And like what he said, when it comes to smaller wrists, it's especially obvious and sometimes obnoxious, quite frankly. But to me, I've learned to live with that, and I think also in my culture, at the very least in the Asian culture, we're kind of used to wearing bigger watches even though our wrists are smaller. It's no secret, many of our of even Swiss brands are catering to the Asian market. When they do that, they reduce the size of their watches so that more of their watches can fit more wrists in Asia. We can see that with the Tudor Royale and with many Rado models. They're geared towards the Asian wrist because our wrists are smaller. But Gshock is an exception. Actually, Gshock, we've learned as a culture to accept these big watches. I've seen range masters and rangemans on some of our Filipino friends that are even smaller than me, and yet it looks okay because you follow it with your attire too, you know. Again, that's not the same taste as others may see, but in reality, many times Even if the watch has an overhang, it's the way you confidently wear these watches that offsets however obnoxious it may look like. You could see that, but not with just the overhang, but with glamorizing their watches, like adding stones or gem sets on their watches. It looks obnoxious many times, that's what you've seen by our friend Nico, but they carry the personality. Their confidence carries the watch with them, so they can wear it fine. And you know what? Some of these owners of watches, they really don't care what people think. And actually, in some ways, that's a good thing. Some ways, it's bad. But again, talking about the overhang, that's a common Gshock thing. Robert Littlehawk says, I have to admit, the Grand and King Seikos were sweet and older Seikos were functional and affordable, but the press to jack the brand to high cost is just a stick out of Rolex game book. Yeah, well, that's also another thing that we see. Not Gshock. We talked about Gshock earlier, but now it's Seiko, as they upscale their Prospex line and then go downscale or like minimize the quality for the Seiko 5 Sports. I can see benefits from both, but yes, the problem is now it's harder to get these Prospex lines now. It's now reaching the $800 up to $1,000 plateau, while back in the time you could get a Prospex for less than $600 or even like $400 in some solar models. But that is true. It's sad to see that, but again, that we all have to adapt. Like, brands need to adapt to the market to continue to survive. And you know, Gshock did that back in the early 2010s when their sales were slumping. They introduced the new premium lines, and that kept the brand afloat. And not just that, it flourished and grew. And I think that's what Seiko is also trying to do. But the problem with that now is that Seiko's Prospex line is also inching closer to the Grand Seiko pricing, which is kind of ridiculous now. But then again, like what we said earlier, these two brands are actually two companies separately, so maybe that's why we're seeing them inching closer to each other's pricing.